Imagine sacrificing everything for your child, your youth, your health, your happiness, only to be humiliated and cast aside when they no longer need you. That's the heartbreaking reality Mama Daniel faced on the worst day of her life. It was a sunny afternoon, but for Mama Daniel, the walk to her son's grand mansion felt heavier than the load she carried. Dressed in her simple village attire, a faded wrapper and headscarf, she clutched a worn cloth bag. Inside were gifts she had carefully prepared: homegrown vegetables from her small farm, a bag of yam flour for his favorite meals, and a sweater she had knitted by hand, one stitch at a time. Her heart raced with hope. Maybe today will be different, she thought. It had been 2 long years since she'd last seen Daniel, her only child. He had grown into a wealthy, successful man in the bustling city, but he had also grown distant, ignoring her calls and brushing off her pleas to visit. Still, she told herself he was just busy. A mother's love always finds an excuse. With trembling hands, she reached for the doorbell of the towering mansion. It was a house so big and polished, it looked like something from a magazine, a far cry from the mud-brick home where she raised Daniel. As the chime echoed through the house, she adjusted her headscarf nervously, whispering a quiet prayer. "Lord, touch his heart today." The massive door swung open, and there he was, Daniel. Dressed in a sharp designer suit, a gold watch glinting on his wrist, he looked every bit the powerful man he had become. But his expression wasn't one of joy or surprise. His brows furrowed, and his eyes narrowed, scanning her from head to toe. "What are you doing here?" Daniel's voice was cold, sharp, and devoid of any warmth. Mama Daniel's smile faltered, but she quickly regained it, holding up her bag like an excited child showing a gift. "My son, I brought you something. Your favorite yam flour from the village. And I made this sweater for you, it'll keep you warm in this big city." Daniel stepped back slightly, his face twisting with disdain as he eyed the bag. "Do you think I need these things? Do I look like someone who eats cheap food or wears homemade clothes?" he snapped. "Mama, you could have at least called. This is embarrassing." Her shoulders sagged. "I just wanted to see you, Daniel. It's been so long." But Daniel cut her off with a wave of his hand. "I'm busy, Mama. I have important meetings and people to see. If you needed something, you should have called my assistant. Please, leave." Before she could utter another word, Daniel stepped back inside and slammed the door shut. The sound echoed like a thunderclap in the empty courtyard, leaving Mama Daniel frozen in place. For a long moment, she stood there, staring at the closed door, clutching her bag tightly against her chest as if it could shield her from the pain. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks, but she wiped them away quickly, not wanting the guards nearby to see her cry. The guards, though, had noticed. They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. One of them approached her hesitantly and said, "Mama, please sit down. Let me get you some water." But she shook her head. "No, thank you. I need to go," she said softly, her voice trembling. She adjusted her bag and began her slow walk back to the bus stop, each step heavier than the last. As she walked, her mind was a storm of emotions: love for the boy she had raised, confusion over how he had changed, and a growing ache in her chest that felt like betrayal. When she finally reached the bus stop, she sat down on the wooden bench, her hands gripping the bag as if it held the pieces of her broken heart. Mama Daniel recalls many years ago when tragedy struck their family. Her husband passed away suddenly, leaving her to care for their 2-year-old son, Daniel, all on her own. At that time, life in the village was already hard, but for a widow, it was even harder. With no one to support her and no savings to fall back on, Mama Daniel found herself in a desperate situation. Daniel was just a little boy, barely old enough to understand what had happened. He would often toddle around the small, single-room house they called home, unaware of the struggles his mother was facing. Mama Daniel, however, understood the weight of their circumstances. She looked at her son and made a silent promise to herself. No matter how hard life became, she would do everything in her power to ensure that Daniel had a chance at a better future. Raising Daniel alone meant that Mama Daniel had to work harder than most people in the village. With very few opportunities available, she took on any job she could find, no matter how grueling or demeaning. Her days started before sunrise and often ended late at night. In the mornings, Mama Daniel worked on local farms, plowing the land, planting seeds, and harvesting crops under the scorching sun. Her hands became rough and calloused from gripping farming tools, but she didn't complain. In the afternoons, she worked as a laborer at construction sites, carrying heavy loads of bricks and sand on her head. People often laughed at her, saying, "This is a man's job. Why don't you just stay home?" But Mama Daniel ignored their words. She knew that staying home wouldn't put food on the table or send Daniel to school. When the evening came, she set up a small stand by the roadside to sell akara, fried bean cakes. The smell of sizzling oil and fresh akara filled the air as Mama Daniel worked tirelessly to attract customers. Her hands often bore burns from the hot oil, and her feet ached from standing all day, but she kept going. Every naira she earned was precious because it meant Daniel could eat that night or have books for school. Even when Mama Daniel was sick or exhausted, she pushed through, telling herself, "If I don't work, who will take care of Daniel?" She sacrificed everything, her health, her comfort, and her dreams, to make sure her son never went to bed hungry. Sometimes, she skipped meals so Daniel could eat more. She wore the same clothes year after year, saving every extra penny for his education. As Daniel grew older, he began to understand the sacrifices his mother was making for him. He watched her come home late at night, covered in dust and sweat, her hands trembling from exhaustion. He noticed how she always gave him the bigger portion of food, even when she was clearly hungry. These moments stayed with him, shaping his heart and mind. At school, Daniel worked hard, determined to make his mother proud. He excelled in his studies, earning top marks and impressing his teachers. Mama Daniel would beam with pride every time someone praised her son, saying, "That boy is going to do great things one day." When Daniel was old enough to leave for university, Mama Daniel sold everything she could spare to make sure he had enough money for the trip. On the day of his departure, she packed a small bag for him, filled with his favorite snacks and a handmade sweater to keep him warm. As she hugged him tightly, tears streamed down her face. "Mama," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion, "I promise you, I'll work hard. I'll make you proud. And when I succeed, I'll take care of you. You'll never have to work again." Mama Daniel smiled through her tears and said, "My son, just remember where you come from. Stay humble, and God will bless your hard work." When Daniel arrived at the university in the bustling city, it was like stepping into a whole new world. The tall buildings, busy streets, and fast-paced life were nothing like the quiet village he had grown up in. But Daniel didn't let the unfamiliarity intimidate him. He threw himself into his studies, working harder than ever before. His dedication paid off. He not only graduated with honors but also earned a scholarship that eased his financial burdens. After completing his degree, Daniel secured a job at a prestigious financial firm. His sharp mind and innovative ideas quickly gained attention, and he rose through the ranks faster than anyone expected. However, Daniel wasn't satisfied with just being successful at his job. He had bigger dreams. Using his savings and a few small investments, he started his own business, a real estate and tech venture. Through clever strategies and hard work, his business flourished. He created housing solutions that attracted high-profile clients, and his reputation as a brilliant entrepreneur grew. Within a few years, Daniel was no longer just a successful man, he was a multimillionaire. As Daniel's business grew, so did his ego. His bank account was overflowing, and his lifestyle transformed into one of luxury. He no longer wore the simple clothes he grew up with. Instead, his wardrobe was filled with tailored suits, expensive watches, and designer shoes. He dined in high-end restaurants and drove flashy cars that made heads turn wherever he went. Daniel had become a man who looked like success. But as his wealth increased, his connection to his past, and to his mother, began to disappear. He no longer saw value in the simple life he once shared with her. The memory of her sacrifices, working in the fields, carrying heavy loads, and frying akara to pay for his school fees, started to fade. To Daniel, that life felt like a distant, embarrassing memory he wanted to erase. He stopped calling his mother as often. When Mama Daniel reached out to him, her voice filled with love and longing, he would dismiss her with excuses. "I'm busy, Mama," he would say. "I'll call you later." But later never came. Sometimes, he didn't even answer the phone. Mama Daniel's calls became a disruption in his fast-paced, glamorous life. Daniel's new life revolved around his growing business empire and the connections he made with other wealthy individuals. He started attending exclusive events, lavish parties, and charity galas, not because he cared about giving back, but because these events boosted his image. At these gatherings, Daniel met Vanessa. Vanessa was everything Daniel thought he wanted. She was stunning, always dressed in designer outfits, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never known struggle. She was the center of attention wherever she went, and Daniel was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. To Vanessa, Daniel's wealth and success were his most attractive qualities. She admired his ambition, but her interest in him was tied to the lifestyle he could offer. Vanessa introduced Daniel to a new world, a world where appearances meant everything. She helped him polish his image, introducing him to other socialites and encouraging him to invest in the right look. With Vanessa by his side, Daniel felt unstoppable. Together, they became the couple everyone envied, the kind of pair who made headlines at every event they attended. But as Daniel's life became more glamorous, the gap between him and his mother grew wider. Mama Daniel, who still lived in the modest village home where Daniel had grown. Back in the village, Mama Daniel lived a life of constant struggle. Her small, weathered home needed attention as it hadn't been repaired in years. Inside, the house felt cold and empty, much like her heart, which longed for the warmth of her son, Daniel. Mama Daniel was no stranger to hard work, but as the years went by, her health began to fail. She had been diagnosed with diabetes, and her body grew weaker by the day. The illness made her tired and drained, leaving her unable to run the small agribusiness that had once been her lifeline. The once vibrant woman who would wake up before dawn to fry bean cakes and sell them to villagers now found herself confined to her worn-out wooden chair most days. One afternoon, as hunger gnawed at her and her medicine sat untouched due to a lack of food to balance it, Mama Daniel reached for her old mobile phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed Daniel's number, a number she had memorized by heart. She pressed the phone tightly to her ear, hoping this time he would answer. After several rings, the call finally connected. "Mama, I'm busy right now," Daniel said curtly, his voice devoid of warmth. "I'll call you back later." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's promised call never came. Each time she tried calling him again, he either didn't pick up or sent her a brief message saying he was too busy. The last time they had spoken was months ago, and even then, he had been distant and dismissive. Mama Daniel's heart ached. It had been almost 4 years since Daniel had sent her any money or visited her in the village. She didn't even know where to start to explain the depth of her struggles. How could she tell him that her roof leaked whenever it rained or that she had sold most of her belongings just to buy food and medicine? The more she thought about it, the heavier the pain in her chest grew. One evening, as she sat outside her house, her neighbor, Mama Yuju, approached her. Mama Yuju was a kind-hearted woman who often brought over small portions of food when she could spare it. "Why do you keep calling that boy, Mama Daniel?" Mama Yuju asked gently, handing her a bowl of gari and soup. "It's clear he's forgotten about you. You should stop relying on him. You'll only hurt yourself more." Mama Daniel forced a weak smile and shook her head. "Daniel is my only son. If I stop calling him, who else will take care of me? I have nobody else." "But how long can you keep waiting for someone who doesn't care?" Mama Yuju pressed. Mama Daniel sighed deeply, her eyes filling with tears. "I raised that boy with everything I had. I worked day and night so he could go to school and have a good life. I believe he will come around. He must. God will touch his heart one day." As the days turned into months, Mama Daniel continued to hold on to her faith. Every morning, she prayed for her son, asking God to bring him back to her. Even though her health worsened and her hopes seemed to dim, she refused to give up. Daniel was her only family, her only hope, and the thought of seeing him again was the only thing keeping her alive. She whispered to herself, "God, I know you are watching. Please, bring my son back to me before it's too late." One day, Mama Daniel sat alone in her small, dimly lit room, her heart heavy with pain. She had just finished another long day of selling akara by the roadside, her back aching and her hands blistered from years of hard work. As she settled onto her worn-out mat to rest, she picked up her old phone to call her son, Daniel. It was the 5th time she had called him that day, and like before, her call went unanswered. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the phone, her trembling fingers gripping it tightly. She whispered to herself, "Why, Daniel? Why have you forgotten me?" She thought back to the sacrifices she had made for him, how she had skipped meals to save money for his school fees, how she had carried heavy loads at construction sites to ensure he never went hungry. Mama Daniel had done everything in her power to give Daniel a future, believing he would one day return and take care of her. But now, he was unreachable, living in luxury while she struggled to survive. As the weight of her heartbreak became unbearable, Mama Daniel sank to her knees on the cold, cracked floor. Her voice broke as she began to pray, but this prayer was different from her usual ones. It was not a prayer for blessings or protection. It was a cry of anguish, raw and unfiltered. "God, I have loved my son with everything I have," she said, her voice shaking. "I gave him my youth, my strength, and my hope. But now, he won't even answer my calls. I am alone in my pain, forgotten by the one I sacrificed everything for." Her tears flowed freely now, staining the front of her faded blouse. She clenched her fists tightly, her body trembling with a mix of sorrow and anger. For the first time in her life, Mama Daniel's pain turned into something sharper, a feeling she had never allowed herself to feel toward her son: resentment. "If he refuses to see my love, if he won't remember my sacrifices, then let him learn the hard way," she continued, her voice rising with emotion. "May you, Daniel, lose everything you hold dear until you understand the meaning of family and sacrifice. Only then will you see the pain you have caused me." Her words echoed in the small room, cutting through the stillness of the night. The air seemed to grow heavier, the shadows in the corners of the room deepening. Mama Daniel felt a strange chill run through her body, but she dismissed it as exhaustion. She had no idea that her words carried a supernatural weight, setting forces into motion that neither she nor Daniel could control. Mama Daniel, drained from the outburst, collapsed onto her mat. Her tears continued to fall until she drifted into a restless sleep, unaware of the chain of events her prayer had unleashed. Want to know what happened to Daniel? Leave a comment for part 2, and I'll tell you the rest of the story.